drive back to Millhaven takes 4 hours from the city, and I made every single one of them without music. I don't know why I do that to myself. There's a playlist on my phone, something my college roommate made me years ago, back when she thought I needed road trip energy. I've never deleted it. That every time I drive back home, I turn the radio off after the first exit and just sit with the sound of the highway. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's a kind of preparation, like I'm giving myself time to remember who I have to be when I get there. The exit for Millhaven is marked with a green sign that always looks faded no matter what season it is. I took it just after 2 in the afternoon. The town looked the same as it always does. The grain co-op on the left, the diner that's been under new management for as long as I can remember, the church with the marquee that always has a typo. That day it said, Cervix Sunday 10 a.m. I smiled a little. I hadn't meant to. My stepmother was the one who called me about the dinner, not my father. She had taken over that role years ago. Family logistics, family decisions, family narrative. She called it being organized. I called it something else, but not to anyone's face. Your father's firm is doing a client appreciation dinner, she said when I picked up. Saturday the 14th. He'd like you to be there. She didn't ask. She told. And then she added, the way she always adds things, like an afterthought that isn't an afterthought at all. You should wear something professional. It's a client event. People will be watching. I didn't say anything for a second. I know how to dress, I said. I'm just saying, these are important clients. Your father has worked with some of them for 20 years. It matters. She didn't say what she meant, which was, don't embarrass us. She never says exactly what she means. She just arranges words in a certain order and leaves the actual sentence for you to finish in your own head. My father had built his accounting firm from scratch, starting with a one-room office above a hardware store when he was 29. By the time I was in high school, Merit Financial had 12 employees and a real office downtown. By the time I graduated college, they had expanded to a second location. He was proud of it, and he should have been. He'd earned it. My stepmother had married him when I was 15. She came from a family where appearances were a kind of currency. She had very specific ideas about what success looked like, and even more specific ideas about who in our family had achieved it. I was not high on that list. I had left Millhaven at 18 to go to college. I'd gone to law school after that, which she had thought was a fine plan, until I didn't join a big corporate firm like she expected, and instead took a position with the state attorney general's office. Government work, she called it. As if government was a polite word for something less. The pay must not be great, she said once at Christmas. It's fine, I said. I'm sure it's very meaningful work, she said. The way someone says meaningful when they mean small. I had stopped explaining myself to her a long time ago. I had stopped explaining myself to most of Millhaven. Honestly, it was easier that way. And besides, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I knew what I did. I knew what it meant. That was enough. I pulled into my father's driveway just before 3. The house was a colonial cream-colored siding, dark shutters, the flower beds my stepmother treated like a second career. She was already outside when I got out of the car, standing on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching me like she'd been there a while. You look tired, she said instead of hello. Long drive, I said. You could have come Friday. I had work Friday. She made a small sound, not quite a sigh. Just enough to register that she had an opinion she was graciously choosing not to share. My father was inside. He came out when he heard my voice and he hugged me in that way he has, firm, brief, a little like he's patting a wall to test if it's solid. He looked older than I expected. His hair had gone almost completely white since the last time I'd seen him, which had been 8 months ago. You made good time, he said. No traffic. Good. Good. We stood there for a moment, the 3 of us. The flower beds were very tidy. A bird was making noise in the oak tree. My stepmother sipped her tea. I made up the guest room, she said. Thank you, I said. And that was the beginning of the weekend. The dinner was at the Millhaven Country Club, the one on the ridge, with the view of the reservoir. I'd been there a handful of times as a kid, mostly for other people's events. It had the kind of interior that tries very hard to feel timeless and instead feels like 1987 dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, carpet the color of a hunting jacket. There were about 60 people when I arrived. My father was already working the room, the way he does, shaking hands and laughing at the right moments. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. My stepmother was beside him, wearing a blue dress and the expression she keeps for formal events, warm on the surface, evaluating underneath. I got a glass of sparkling water from the bar and found a spot near the window. The reservoir was flat and silver in the early evening light. I stood and looked at it and tried to just be somewhere quiet for a minute before anyone noticed me. That lasted about 4 minutes. "You must be Stephen's daughter," said a man beside me. He was somewhere in his 60s, ruddy-faced, the kind of man who's spent his life being the biggest presence in the room. "I am," I said. "Lena." "Bob Hargrove. I've had my business with your dad for," he counted on his fingers, "going on 18 years. Good man, great man." "He is," I said. We talked for a few minutes about nothing specific. He asked what I did. I told him. He looked mildly interested and then mildly confused, the way people do when they're trying to figure out if that's impressive or not. "So you work for the state," he said. "The AG's office, yes, huh?" He nodded. "Good work, I'm sure." And then my stepmother appeared, which is something she does, materializes at moments when she can shape a conversation. "Bob," she said, touching his arm, "I'm so glad you made it. Doesn't this venue look beautiful?" And then, almost as an aside, while still smiling at him, "Lena's been with the state for, what is it now, 4 years?" 5? 6, I said. 6 years, yes. She made a small, appreciative sound. "She works very hard. It's just not the path we imagined for her. But, well, you know how children are." She laughed lightly. "You make your plans, and then they grow up and make their own choices." Bob Hargrove laughed politely. I kept my face exactly where it was. Later, at one of the high-top tables, she did it again with different words to different people. I watched it happen with a kind of detached clarity. This was the thing about her. She never said anything technically untrue. She just arranged the facts in a frame that made them look like something else. 6 years in government work. Not what we hoped for her. The implication floated in the air like smoke. I didn't correct her. I didn't insert myself into the frame. I've been asked since, why not? Why didn't I just say something? Why didn't I explain? I used to think the answer was that I was being patient, or strategic, or above it. But the honest answer, the real one, is that I had tried once, years ago. I had sat across from her at the kitchen table and tried to explain what I actually did, what the cases looked like, what the impact was. I had laid it out carefully, like I would for a jury. She had listened. She had nodded. And then she had said, "But do you ever think about going into private practice? You could make real money." After that, I understood that explaining wasn't something I could do. Not for her. Not in Millhaven. You can't change a frame for someone who needs the frame more than they need the truth. So I had stopped trying. I worked. I did my job. I let the work be what it was without performing it for anyone. And I went back to the window, and I looked at the reservoir, and I waited. The thing about my job, the thing she never understood because I never found a way to make her understand, is that it is not small. I don't say that to be defensive. I say it because it's true and because the truth matters to me, even when it doesn't matter to anyone else in the room. I had joined the Attorney General's office 6 years ago as an assistant AG, assigned to the Consumer Protection Division. I had spent 2 years on financial fraud cases, the kind where elderly people lose their retirement savings to schemes designed to look like legitimate investments. After that, I had moved into a specialized task force, and after that into my current role. 14 months before the dinner at the country club, I had led the prosecution on a case that had taken 3 years to build. A network of companies that had defrauded investors across 11 states. The case had gone federal. There had been a press conference. My name had been in the coverage. Not in Millhaven, of course. Millhaven reads the local paper, and the regional TV news, and the regional TV news, and the regional TV news had not covered our press conference. My stepmother had not Googled me. She operated on the information she had, which was, Lena works for the state. Lena has a small apartment in the city. Lena is not what we planned. And that was fine. I had made my peace with it a long time ago. What I had not made my peace with was watching her say it to other people in public, at my father's event, in a room full of his clients, with a smile that said she was doing me a favor by mentioning me at all. I set my sparkling water down on a tray. I breathed. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Dinner was assigned seating, which meant I was at a table near the back of the room with 2 of my father's newer clients and their spouses, and my stepmother's sister, who had driven down from Traverse City and who talked exclusively about her kitchen renovation. My stepmother passed by the table twice during dinner, each time stopping to say something lightly cheerful that contained, like a stone in a shoe, a small point of pressure. The second time she mentioned to the couple across from me, a man named Tim and his wife, who had told me they were considering moving their business accounts, that I had always been the academic one in the family, even if academia didn't quite pan out. I had not been in academia. I had gone to law school. Those are different things. Tim's wife looked at me with a polite expression. "What kind of law do you practice?" she asked. "Consumer protection, primarily," I said. "I work with the state AG's office on fraud cases. Financial crimes, mostly." "Oh," she said, and something shifted in her face. "That sounds—" And then someone else started talking, and the moment passed, and dinner went on. After the main course, there was a short program. My father said a few words, thanked his clients, told a story about the early days that got a good laugh. He was gracious and warm and genuinely good at this. I watched him from my table and felt something complicated. Affection and distance at the same time. The way you feel about a place you grew up that doesn't quite fit you anymore. When the program ended, people started moving around, going to the bar, regrouping into conversations. I stood and stretched and thought about whether I could reasonably leave in the next 45 minutes. I was heading toward the back hallway when I heard my name. Not my name, exactly. My last name, Merritt. I turned. There were 3 people standing at the far side of the room, 2 men and a woman, all of them in their 50s or 60s. All of them with the look of people who spend a lot of time in professional settings. The woman who had spoken was looking at me with recognition, the kind that's very specific. Not "I think I know you," but "I know exactly who you are." Her name was Sandra Hollis. I had met her once, briefly, in a conference room in the federal building downtown during the 3rd year of the case I had led. She was a senior investigator with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She had been one of the federal partners on the prosecution. "Sandra," I said. She smiled. "A real one, not the dinner party kind." "I thought that was you. I almost didn't." She looked around at the room. "What are you doing in Millhaven?" "My father's firm," I said. "Client dinner." "Of course." She turned to the 2 men beside her. "Of course." She turned to the 2 men beside her. "This is Lena Merritt. She led the AG's team on Harwick Capital. The case we finally closed last year." She said it the way you say something that doesn't require explanation, like saying she was the surgeon or she was the one who landed the plane. One of the men extended his hand. "Tom Keene," he said, "General Counsel, Midwest Regional Bank. I followed that case very closely. You did extraordinary work." "Thank you," I said. The other man was already nodding. "That prosecution set a precedent we're still citing," he said. "There was a piece in the journal about it last month." I was aware, at the edge of my peripheral vision, that my stepmother had appeared somewhere to my left. I didn't look at her. "It was a team effort," I said. 3 years of a lot of people working very hard. You're being modest, Sandra said. She's being modest, she said to the two men. And then to me, are you staying in Millhaven or just the weekend? I said. I'd drive back Sunday. Well, she looked at me with something that felt like satisfaction. It's good to see you here. You should be proud of what that team accomplished. We talked for a few more minutes. Sandra introduced me to her husband, who had come over from the bar. Tom Keene told me his firm had actually changed some of its compliance protocols in the wake of the Harwick prosecution. The other man asked if I was planning to stay in public service long term. I said I was. At no point did I look at my stepmother, but I knew she was there. I could feel the particular quality of silence that comes from someone who has been saying one thing all evening and is now standing very still. When the conversation finally wound down, Sandra and her husband were leaving. Tom Keene was being pulled away by someone else. I turned. My stepmother was standing about 8 feet away. She was holding her glass. She was not smiling. My father was beside her. He had come over some time during the conversation. I didn't know exactly when. He was looking at me with an expression I didn't quite know how to name. Not pride exactly, not surprise. Something in between those two things, like he was recognizing something he should have known was there. I looked at him, he looked at me. I didn't say anything, he didn't say anything either, not yet. But something had shifted, quietly, permanently, the way things do when a fact that has been invisible for a long time finally enters a room and sits down. The rest of the evening was quieter. People finished their drinks and gathered their things and said their goodbyes with the particular warmth of people who've had a good time and are ready to go home. Sandra found me again on her way out and pressed her card into my hand and said to call her sometime. There was a panel at a conference in the spring she thought I might want to be on. My father drove us back to the house. The three of us sat in the car without talking for most of the ride. The radio was on low. Some country station, the signal drifting in and out. My stepmother looked out the window. I looked at the road. When we got home, she went upstairs almost immediately. Said she was tired. Said good night to the room in general. My father poured himself a small glass of water in the kitchen and stood at the counter and didn't drink it. She didn't know, he said finally. I know, I said. I didn't either. A pause. I mean, I knew you were doing well, but I didn't know the specifics. You never asked, I said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, I didn't. He set the glass down. That man, Keene. He said you changed how they handle compliance. We changed how a lot of people handle compliance, I said. That was the point. He looked at me then, really looked the way he hadn't in years. Maybe longer than years. I should have asked, he said. Yeah, I said. You should have. I said it gently, because I meant it gently. I wasn't angry at him. I had done my grieving about my father a long time ago, in the specific way you grieve someone who's still alive. The version of them you needed who wasn't quite there. I had gotten through it. I had built a life that didn't need his validation to hold together, but that didn't mean I didn't notice. Get some sleep, I said. It was a good event. People had a nice time. Lena. It's okay, I said. It really is. I went upstairs and lay in the guest room with the window cracked, listening to the sound of wind in the oak tree. The room had a painting of a lighthouse above the dresser that had been there since I was a teenager. I had looked at that lighthouse approximately 10,000 times over the years. From the guest room, because I had never really had my own room in this house. I didn't feel triumphant. That's the thing people always expect, I think. The story should end with some feeling of victory, some warmth of having been proven right. But it wasn't like that. It was more like exhaling. Like something that had been held at an angle for a long time was finally allowed to sit flat. I had not done any of it to prove anything. I had taken the job in the AG's office because the work mattered. I had spent 6 years building something I believed in because I believed in it. Not because I believed in it, not because I was waiting for a moment like tonight. Tonight was not the point. The work was the point. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter. Of course it mattered. Not the being recognized. That part would have embarrassed me if anything. What mattered was simpler than that. What mattered was that for one evening, in a room full of people who had known me since I was a teenager, with a bedroom I didn't quite fit into, the frame my stepmother had spent years constructing around me just dissolved. Quietly. Without drama. Without me having to say a word. Sandra had done it in 4 sentences, Tom Keane in 3, and the thing was, they weren't doing it for me, they were just telling the truth. That's all. They were just saying what was true. I lay there for a long time after the house went quiet. At some point I thought about calling my best friend. She's always up late. She would have wanted to hear it. She would have made me laugh about it. But I didn't call. I just lay there in the dark with the lighthouse above me and the oak tree shifting outside, and this feeling that was too quiet to be satisfaction and too full to be nothing. The drive home Sunday was the same as the drive there. 4 hours. No music. My stepmother made breakfast before I left. Eggs, toast, orange juice. She was civil. She was always civil. She didn't apologize. I hadn't expected her to. My father walked me to my car. He stood with his hands in his pockets while I put my bag in the trunk. "I'll call more," he said. "Okay," I said. "I mean it." "I know," I said. "I believe you." I didn't know if I did completely. But I wanted to, and sometimes that's where you start. I hugged him, longer than usual. Something that surprised us both, I think. And then I got in the car and backed out of the driveway. The faded exit sign was easier to pass this time. The grain co-op, the diner, the church with the typo. Someone had fixed it since Saturday. Sunday served 10 a.m. All correct. All in order. I got onto the highway and drove. Somewhere around the 2nd hour, I turned the radio on. The playlist my college roommate had made me was still right there when I pressed shuffle. The first song was something loud and a little ridiculous that I used to love when I was 22. I turned it up. I drove home. I've thought a lot about what that evening actually was. Not the drama of it, the part where Sandra introduced me to Tom, where my father stood very still and said nothing, but the quieter thing underneath it. The thing that had been building for years before that room, before that dinner, before any of it. Here's what I know. The way people treat you is almost always a reflection of the story they've decided to believe. My stepmother had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was a cautionary tale. A daughter who left and came back with nothing to show for it. She needed that story to make sense of something, and I was never entirely sure what. But she held on to it with the kind of grip that has nothing to do with the person it's about. And I had let her hold it, not because I was passive. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood, eventually, that you cannot argue someone out of a story they find useful. You can only live in a way that makes the story harder and harder to tell. That takes time. It takes patience that sometimes feels indistinguishable from suffering. It takes showing up again and again to do the work in front of you. Not the work of proving yourself, but the actual work. The cases, the hours, the decisions that nobody in Millhaven would ever read about in the local paper. The cause of what happened at that dinner was not luck. It was not timing. It was 6 years of choosing, over and over, to care about the right things, the people who lost their savings, the systems that needed changing, the colleagues who deserved a team that took the work seriously. That is what Sandra recognized when she walked across the room. Not me, exactly. The work. And the work was what I had given everything to, not because I was waiting for a moment like that one, but because the work itself was the reason. What I want to say, to myself, to anyone who has ever stood in a room where someone was quietly rewriting their story for an audience, is this: integrity has a long return window. It doesn't pay out on a schedule you can predict or plan around. You do the right thing for years, and sometimes nobody notices. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the Millhavens of your life, believing whatever version of you is convenient for them. The alternative, performing yourself for people who aren't watching in good faith, costs more than it's worth. My father called 3 weeks after the dinner. He asked about the Harwick case. He asked specific questions. He listened to the answers. It was a 20-minute conversation that I think cost him something to initiate, and I respect that. I don't know if my stepmother has revised her story. I suspect she has filed what happened that evening somewhere manageable and moved on. That's fine. That is genuinely fine. What I carried home from that weekend, not the recognition, not the handshakes, but the real thing, was the confirmation of something I had already chosen to believe, that the life you build in private, the standards you hold yourself to when no one is watching, those are the things that eventually speak for you in a room full of people who thought they already knew your whole story. You just have to be willing to wait. And keep working, and let the truth find its own timing. It always does.